Okay, welcome to the first episode of the IFA podcast. This has probably been 6 years in the making. We just didn't realize it until a couple of months ago. And the whole thing, we decided to do this based on this topic that we're going to discuss today. And the topic is scrubbing classic books, scrubbing older books to be considered acceptable for what the publishers call a modern audience or modern sensibilities. And I guess what we're going to kind of discuss today is how sensible is it to censor books for modern audiences? Are modern audiences so stupid that they need these publishers to guide them like parents guiding children, considering in the past we did not need this. And the IFA, the Independent Fiction Alliance, for those of you who are tuning in and don't know, is we are an alliance of publishers, independent publishers and writers. And because of things that happened during the COVID period, we are also staunchly opposed to censorship of any kind. And so just a quick background, this conversation got started because somebody alerted to me. I didn't know this. I'd heard about it in other cases, but in 2023, the original James Bond novels were subject to a scrubbing. There is one James Bond book, Live and Let Die, that by modern standards is very offensive, and we can discuss that. But there are many books that were written because it's a strange concept for some people today to understand. 50, 60, 70, even 15 years ago, social mores were different. And so I guess we could start this conversation by asking, what is the purpose of making works from the past conform to our social mores of the present?
I think it's to give a degree of social credit to the people doing the censoring. They can claim that they found something among the people that agree with their agenda, and it doesn't really help anything with regards to audiences at all. It's a pretty clear regression to need to change Ian Fleming's stories. You would want to have the book stay the same and see what was acceptable back then versus what is acceptable now, and see the improvement of the change instead of just changing it without his permission.
Well, which is the cardinal sin.
Yep.
It's one thing to do that with the author's permission, approval, however you want to put it. Ian Fleming's dead and gone, and for people to go back into his works now and sort of clean them up is where does that stop? And are we just going to take the classic paintings and say, let's put a little rouge in there? There's really no end to it once you get started. And certainly in Canada, there was an example at one of the Toronto galleries, and I don't remember which one right now, so I'm not going to name that, when they renamed an Emily Carr painting. And it was originally called Indian House, and they gave it a new title long after she's dead and gone. And so that's a certain amount of sacrilege there. You can't mess with somebody's work like that after they're dead and gone, because they obviously can't sign off on it. They can't approve of it.
Yeah, I think I've been doing a bit of research on this, and it's a fascinating topic. I'm going to stick to Ian Fleming and James Bond just for the moment. One of the interesting things about that, and look, I find the entire concept of rewriting what an author has done to be horrendous. And look, and even if the author gave permission, I would be questioning then that author's commitment to their own artistic integrity. But anyway, that's another subject, but or related subject, I should say. But I think in relation to Bond, it's interesting some of the rewrites that they've been at pains to remove certain what are now seen as racist aspects, and yet one of the commentators I was reading, a female commentator, was complaining that they've taken out the racist stuff, although not all of it, because apparently the Korean character named Oddjob remains in Goldfinger. But most of the racist references that have been changed or removed are in relation to black people. But then a lot of what this female commentator was complaining about was the sexism that's been left in the texts, what they perceive as sexism. But I think the whole concept of this is very interesting. Of course, if we can go back to a very old literary icon, Shakespeare. I mean, that's where this most infamously started with the English guy Thomas Bowdler, which of course is where we get the phrase "to Bowdlerize" from, which is what we're talking about. When he and his sister rewrote Shakespeare's works into what they called the family Shakespeare, in order to remove anything which was racy or offensive to young ears or blasphemous or any of the rest of it. And if I can quote an example from that, and we're all familiar with this phrase because, like many Shakespearean phrases, it's entered our colloquialisms. But so the original line, this is from the play Othello, and the character Iago saying, "I am one, sir, that comes to tell you your daughter and the Moor are now making the beast with two backs." And that was rewritten to "Your daughter and the Moor are now together." And that's back in the early 1800s that was done. So that's sort of, there has been a history of this. But I think now in our current age of extreme wokeism, I think it's really come to a head. And it seems to be open slather on any authors who might upset anybody to have their work rewritten.
Well, you're certainly allowed to make these declarations. If I go through anybody's library, or you go through my library, I'm sure that we can all find works in each other's collections that stick in our craw, and we can declare it this, that, or the other thing. Is quite another matter entirely when we go in and we make that declaration as if that's justification to change the dead author's words. And that's where we're at. It's not the argument that bothers me. It's the idea that you make that argument, and now you can go in and fuck with the author's work and say, okay, now it's good, fixed it, and that's the problem.
Yeah. Hold on. I realize I have been a terrible host. I didn't introduce everybody. I haven't forgotten any of your points, by the way, but over here, at least to my left, is Vern Smith. He is our Canadian transplant. He speaks on behalf of Canada, but he also talks about American politics because he's come to the United States and become an American citizen. So that, unlike some Canadians who like to talk about American politics, Vern is actually qualified. Vern is also a writer and works with Run Amok Publishing. Above Vern in this Brady Bunch scenario that I see here is Andrew Miller.
Long live the dark stuff.
Andrew. Andrew is our correspondent down there in LA. And then way down there next to Andrew is A.B. Patterson, our Australian correspondent there. And then even though I'm in California, technically I'm from the Midwest, so I'll claim that as my territory. I just wanted to add a few things as I was kind of doing a little bit of research. So the two of the really big names that were affected by this in 2023 were Roald Dahl and R.L. Stine. And one of the things they wanted to remove from Roald Dahl's books were words like fat and ugly, which is funny because I have a story in my MFA thesis, my worthless fucking MFA thesis called Fat and Ugly. And I guess that's why I can't get that story published. That's got to be the reason. And then
we have sorry to interrupt, Alec, but we do have a punk rock song from Canada from the fictional band Hardcore Logo that is titled "Rock and Roll is Fat and Ugly." So I imagine we can fix that up somehow now as well.
Yeah. And then also black was changed to dark. And one of the more common instances of this. One that a lot of people know about is somebody went through and removed or changed all the N-word appearances in Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn has been controversial for a long time. It's the classic case of we don't understand context, we don't understand history, we certainly don't understand historical context. We just see the word and we consider it on the surface all by itself and nothing else. Therefore, it's offensive. And going along with some of the comments that were already made, I'm reminded of a night that my wife and I checked into a hotel in Upper Montana several years ago. And I asked if there was a hot tub at the pool. And they said, well, we used to have a hot tub. In fact, it's still there. It just doesn't have any water in it, and you're not allowed to use it because one person who was disabled, I don't know if that's the current nomenclature for that, but who was disabled could not use the hot tub and complained. And so the hot tub, no more hot tub for anybody. And this kind of, to me, it illustrates what this is really about. Initially, it's about I'm offended by this. I don't want to read this, therefore nobody else gets to read it. And one last thing I'll say before I throw it back to the committee there is I looked up, has scrubbing the Ian Fleming or Roald Dahl books, has this increased their readership? Has it increased sales? Because there's obviously a business decision that was made. And the answer is no. Amazon has shown no increase in sales since these changes took place. So there can be no economic argument for this. In other words, no hippies or whatever are saying, oh, now Live and Let Die doesn't have racist words in it. Now I'll read James Bond books. That's not happening.
I'm not aware of any example anecdotally or based in any type of like study or evidence that I've read that changing this stuff has resulted in any type of social good or social improvement, or someone that was going to do something bad but then didn't do it because someone took this particular action. And I just try to frame it, they see it as progressive, but it's regressive. It's like an example. This is not really connected to a book, but I feel it's kind of similar, just off the top of my head. They put on HBO Max, they put all the episodes of Mad Men on. And Jen and I have just been watching all of Mad Men for probably the third time all the way through since December. And for people who don't know that show, it's about advertising execs in the 60s. There's sexism, there's homophobia, there's racism. And there's a particular episode where one of the main characters is at a wedding, and it's like a Kentucky Derby themed wedding, and he sings in blackface. And when you watch it now, there's a warning before the episode. I don't know of anyone that actually believes that needed a warning. Everyone knew that show would have been like 2008 to 2015 when it ended. And during that period, every single person that watched it was able to see and understand very clearly that this is a show that is talking about how this was a bad thing to do when this happened. You didn't need that, but things have regressed so much that you have to get this little mini like lecture before the episode begins now. I don't think that it's helping anybody other than just the people that want to get credit for ruining works of art for other people.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead,
Vern. I was going to say, I mean, I think it's very much to do with, the narcissistic virtue seeking of these people that want to do this. And that sort of fits within the current climate, which is why I think, whilst, as I've said from those historical examples, we've had this in existence. Censorship's been around, obviously, in one form or another forever. But it seems to be on steroids now. I mean, to go back to Huckleberry Finn, as from the research that I've done, I mean, I read the book when I was younger as well, but, from the research I've done, Mark Twain wrote that as an anti-racist book. book. So the irony then of trying to sanitize it with racism is, and that does come back to what you're saying about context as well. So it's, I mean, it's very problematic. I mean, there's another example which is highly ironic was the censorship of Fahrenheit 451, Bradbury's classic. So that was on my research, but so that in the 60s, the publishers put out a special edition of that, which they modified over 75 passages to eliminate words such as hell, damn, and abortion. Now that was done without Bradbury's knowledge, and he obviously complained when he was made aware of that, and they reversed their decision. But that was several years later. So those expurgated versions were on sale for many years, and that was obviously an author who was still living it then. So, but again, given what Fahrenheit 451 is all about, again, very ironic.
Well, just to get back to what Alec was talking about at the beginning about as it increased sales, and I think the only thing it's accomplished in terms of sanitizing these books is giving the out of print editions a higher value as a collectible, and you take any Ian Fleming book, 114th printing or edition or whatever, and but it still has the author's original words. If I'm going to buy that title for myself, or I'm going to buy it as a gift for somebody, I'm going to go after the original document, and that's the document that's going to maintain value. And so you've got an old paperback that was probably selling for $5, and all of a sudden it's worth something as a collectible because they are not making any more of that edition. They are making the sanitized edition, and I, as a reader and as a half-ass collector, the sanitized edition has no value or no interest in me. The original document does. And so that's what I'm going to go after. And I don't think I'm that unique in that regard. People are going to go back now and buy the original thing. And, anybody who's been sitting on a couple cardboard boxes of those $5 paperbacks, now has a nice little investment that's come to fruition.
You remind me of when I argue with people regarding movies, when say the all-female Ghostbusters came out. One of the people who defend this, basically the what I call the establishment brownie hounds, they said, well, it's the original will still be there, right? You can I had a problem with when Dawn of the Dead was remade. People said, well, the original will still be there, but if you crawled up on IMDb, it's the remake that comes up first. If it's on television, just on regular television, it's the remake. It's not the original. I get excited every time I see something like that, and then I realize, oh, it's not Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's Michael Bay's, and with the book situation, because after we had our conversation the last time, I went and looked for the original Ian Fleming copies, the original books, and yeah, they're all now being sold for lots of money. And you almost the conspiracy theorist in all of us looks at that and says, well, maybe somebody's already said it. Maybe it's on purpose. Maybe the Fleming family has a bunch of these old Ian Fleming books in the stockade somewhere, and well, how do we raise the value of these? Well, let's have the publishers. I mean, I think with the Fleming situation, it's because the family approved it. I think that's something we need to explore is what do we think of the family of a dead author making decisions about the author's work now that the author is not here to argue with them?
It's terrible. Terrible.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want any family member of mine making any decisions about my work.
Yeah. Same.
If they edited your books, AB, they would just be pamphlets.
I do wonder like what you said, Alec, like I do wonder sometimes, like, is this some type of like a plot to, you know, increase sales? But I think there's probably some examples of people being that shrewd, but you know, I live in LA and it's just like, you know, people are just in an echo chamber. It's just the idea that like, oh, you need to change this. That's the way things are in 2026. And no one like us steps in and just says like, no, don't do it. That's not a good idea. They just don't have anyone in their lives that could like offer a rational perspective about that. I just, you know, Ian Fleming is a guy that serves in World War II. He sees the British Empire, you know, the UK, you know, wins the war, but they see their empire fall apart. And he creates this character that's kind of like a one-man empire. And there is this degree of like, there's a little bit of nihilism sometimes in those books. They're like very offensive at times, but it's like, that's what he needed to get out then. Like, I don't know if anybody, like, who is the person that hears they've censored a bunch of James Bond books, I'll go buy that and get something out. Like, I don't believe that this person even exists. It's just people that want to feel better about themselves by saying that they did something good for the world, and they want the social status that bestows upon them in the circles that they travel in.
Yeah.
Well, we're moving into a social credit system if we haven't moved already. And I think we've, you know, I've had this conversation with some of you before, and I think we all know people who have expressed themselves to us in the past. And, you know, suddenly we see them on social media in 2026 and, you know, they're telling us the exact opposite. And we know damn well that's not what they think. And, you know, it was one of the most telling things in terms of sort of arc when I moved here. So I moved here, you know, almost 10 years ago. And shortly after I arrived, I heard about these guys who were hoarding copies of Blazing Saddles. And at the time, I thought they were just a little bit crazy. And, you know, you move to 2026 and I think they were prophets now. And that's where we are. I think it's valuable for us to have these discussions. I think it's valuable for us to have these discussions publicly. But I think the most important thing you can do is to do your own work and to do it without fear and without filter. And, you know, that's the best revenge we can have. That's the best statement we can make. But, you know, it's sort of, it's gone. Like we've swam too far from the dock. And what you're talking about, Andrew, in California, I'm in Illinois, and it's like that here. And you know, I'm terrified in some circles to say my name. It is an echo chamber, and you know, if you say anything out of line or something that's deemed out of line, you know, there's going to be social consequences and possibly work consequences.
Yep.
And you know, that's the reality, and that's why we have a society of moral exhibitionists of little substance doing the exact things that we're talking about. You can say what you want about Blazing Saddles, you can say what you want about Ian Fleming, you can say what you want about anything. You're entitled to your opinion, and I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is people using their opinions as justification for, okay, I'm going to go in and now change this 50-year-old work, or I'm going to applaud somebody else doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and it comes back to egotistical narcissism, which characterizes the entire woke movement. And it's that view that I find it offensive, and my view has more merit than your view. And I'm going to impose my view on you. And that's what it comes down to. So, yeah, I mean, look, I mean, in a way, I'd like to think that there was some sort of nefarious commercial motive, but I don't think there is. You know, I think it is simply that these people are virtue signaling, and this is a platform which their virtue signaling can have a whole new level of influence. And but the biggest problem is, even if currently you can get both versions, how long does that remain for? I mean, do we get to a stage where, we've got an illicit black market in secondhand books because they're the ones which have got the original text in them? I know that when I first heard about it, sorry, go on.
Well, I'm sure, just on your point, I'm sure this is going to lead to a certain amount of bootlegging. If you want the original document, there's always going to be a way to get it. And in terms of the Fleming books, anyways, they published so many in the first place that you're probably going to have to pay for them now. But if you want them, you can get them. And so I don't. It's like Beatles albums. There were so many made that there's always going to be a certain amount of accessibility there, and the same thing with the Fleming books. And I think the works that will generally be attacked are the works that are going to be that were made that broadly available in the first place.
That makes me that brings up the question to me. Usually, in this scenario, when the establishment wants to revise or censor the past, or in particular a piece of art or a book, it's because the object in question is a threat to the current order or the desired current order. And so then I just have to question, what in the world about a James Bond book is threatening to the modern establishment?
I think it's from a woke perspective, and obviously I'm using my imagination here because I'm clearly not woke. But that's their view of the world and how the world should be, and therefore anything which doesn't fit that paradigm is a threat. I think it is that simple.
Well, I also think we're at a stage in history where the individual is bad, individuality is bad, and clearly James Bond was a rogue operative, and you'll see, particularly in Canada now, the government is throwing around the phrase social cohesion, and so somebody who rises up and operates as Bond did is a threat to that. It's something that the proponents of social cohesion don't want, and you'll see increasingly, particularly in Canada, that is stamped out. I've come to say that back home, I'd like to say this a little bit more politely, but in Canada, you can't say fuck all of consequence without facing serious consequences, and that is not free speech. And I find myself defending people I disagree with, and I know Andrew is going to think I'm a crusade, but I went and got my COVID shots. And I took a calculated risk, and I sort of, made a determination that my best chance was to get the shots. And that's fine. And a lot of people thought otherwise, and that's fine too. But the people who thought otherwise and did otherwise faced serious consequences. And the people who spoke about it, were discredited as wearing tinfoil hats and whatnot, and in some cases, particularly if they were effective in what they were talking about in terms of organizing or getting a message out, were discredited and pilloried and had their reputations destroyed. And that's not what I want. I don't want, if you disagree with me, to suffer any kind of consequences. We each have our opinion. The fact that I'm on the quote unquote right side of the COVID shot does not give me the moral high ground. It gives me a point of view. And so I will defend, of course, the people who disagree with me, because their rights are in fact mine.
And it's interesting you use that phrase, moral high ground, because I think the crux of this is that nobody ever has the moral high ground.
And that's a truism. And if somebody is declaring that,
beware.
Yeah, beware. And, and I see a lot of politicos around here, and they're carrying on a lot like Jehovah's. And once I see that, I know all I need to know. I don't need to argue with these people. It's we're allowed to have our point of view, and that's all we have. We have our experiences, which inform our perspective, and we have our point of view. And the fact that I think this and you think that does not give me the moral high ground over you any more than your perspective gives you the moral high ground over me.
I think it's really important just to keep spreading that perspective and not have everything be all about like it's either us versus them. It's you're on the good side or you're on the bad side. Like, speaking of Ian Fleming's family, like an important thing to just encourage various artists. There's an example that just came to mind. It's not a book, but it's definitely similar. The movie The French Connection, which a big point of that movie is that like the main character Popeye is very effective but kind of a psycho, and there's a scene where he uses a racial slur, and I remember William Friedkin explaining that he was so nervous about leaving that in when that movie came out in like 1971 or 2, I forget exactly when it came out. And he described, I think it was probably just the commentary for the DVD that I heard this, where he described showing it to an all-black audience, and the reaction was extremely positive because they had never gone to the movies and seen a cop talk the way that they actually hear cops talk to them in a movie. That was something that they regarded as a very positive thing, and they obviously knew that the people making the movie were not trying to enforce that perspective. But William Friedkin made that movie when he was really young, and he signed off right before he passed on just cutting that scene out of the movie. Like, you can see versions of that movie where it's like a long take and it's Gene Hackman and Roy Scheider, and then there's just a really absurd, awkward jump cut where it's part of the same shot still, but the offending words were taken out. And it's just like, I think he was just so pressured late in life. I mean, this would be like right before he would have passed away, that you have to just be an anti-racist at all costs and not fall back on the nuance you were very, very clearly going for in this thing that you did 50 years ago. And he signed off on his own thing getting changed. It's just like some people just succumb to the pressure. It's like, I don't think, like, you hear these stories about like when Coppola makes a movie and he always had this other plan than what came out, and then later on he releases all these different versions. It's like, if the work was compromised in the first place, I don't think that's that big of a deal if he wants to change it. But like, to put something out, to be happy with it, to be worried about how it would be received, and then be happy with it, and then decades later just change it, it's just like, that was such a tragic thing to me, to know that he succumbed to that pressure at the very end and let people change his movie.
Well, you can't even talk about that. It happens or happened anymore. Wendy Mesley, a long-serving journalist with CBC in Canada, quoted somebody who used that word in a meeting, and quoted them accurately, and she lost her job. She was a very long-serving journalist at CBC, served there at least since the early 90s, if not the late 80s. And she was run right out of there for quoting somebody accurately. And, that's where we are. And you fast forward to a few weeks ago, and I apologize. I get the Arquette sisters mixed up, but approximately 32 years after Pulp Fiction, she's jumping all over Quentin Tarantino for using that word in the movie. And he's right. When he says you took the money, like, she, certainly had access to the script and, knew what was going on there. And for her to come out now, it's like somebody's holding a gun to her back off screen and making her read from a prepared speech. and it's really gross. It's unfortunate, and she's got zero credibility in complaining about it at this point.
It's also a thing where AB mentioned, I forget what character was not changed in James Bond.
Odd job.
But the people that do the censoring, there's never any clear logic to the censoring. It's like certain groups, certain offensive words, certain phrases, certain plot points, those will get erased. But like in my experience, the people that get so offended about this stuff these days, if you just ask them like, well, how do you feel about the Jews? And they don't really tend to have a tolerant opinion in my experience. So the thing that they're so offended about in one certain group, they're pretty much ready to turn everything into the 1930s again with another group. Like I brought up Mad Men, there was a warning about racial images, but that show, it's every episode, it's like about sexism, it's about homophobia, but there were no other warnings for anything else. It's always just like a very, very specific set of rules that tend to not make any sense if you just try to think about them logically or ask if these rules are consistent in any way. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's also a matter about standards, and we've got now different standards for different people, and the basic rule that I was brought up with is, generally speaking, you don't give people shit for their gender, their sexuality, or their skin color. And now, it's like these people can give these people shit, but those people can't give those people shit, but these people over there can give everybody shit, and so, the further you get away from the standards, the further you sort of muddy the issue. And, there is no rule. There's just different strokes for different folks. And, that's where we are. That's where we are in terms of a broader society. That's where we are in terms of news and what news gets covered and how it gets covered. And that's where we are in fiction. And all those things inform fiction and of course the gatekeepers thereof.
So to bring everything kind of into the situation that we currently exist in as people involved in independent publishing in one respect or another. I've talked about it now several times. I was canceled by a bunch of imbeciles in 2020, 2021. One of the things that set off their alarms against me was I made a joke about sensitivity readers in 2019. And one of the most absolutely batshit crazy people on that team came after me and lectured me about why, because I basically compared it to censorship, sensitivity readers. I don't know, is that still a thing? Are the big five, do they still have sensitivity, or do independent, is anybody doing that anymore? Because again, isn't that just an expression of, so I hire Andrew as a sensitivity reader, right? Well, Andrew has things that offend him, right? But they don't necessarily offend anybody else, and so he goes through another writer's manuscript, and then he sees like Andrew is a fan of lemon yogurt, and the writer makes disparaging remarks about lemon yogurt. So Andrew tells me, you're going to have to tell the writer to change this to strawberry yogurt, or you can't publish this. What fucking purpose does that serve?
Well, I know that an author that I heard on the Bret Easton Ellis podcast recently, who just kind of wrote this book about, the name of the book escapes me, but it was about all of this stuff in publishing. And he had a whole section about sensitivity readers, and he went through how much money sensitivity readers make. And so that's definitely an element to it. Just collect a check and just point out the things that are offensive. You don't need to be credentialed. You don't need to have some sort of degree from sensitivity reader training school or anything. You just make a lot of money doing that. I mean, I know that's one element of it.
Well, I do think it's still happening. I saw something the other day somebody advertising services on social media for to be a beta reader, which I think is the same thing. Is that the same thing? No,
not how I. No, I wouldn't say it like
Should
that.
not be.
What's
Yeah,
the
should
beta-
not be.
My take on a beta reader is somebody who's reading your manuscript or whatever draft form it's in order to give you feedback on how does the story flow and does that work, does that not work. Those sort of that, and I use them as well on my manuscripts just to get. But yeah, it's not.
Oh, okay.
I mean, not to come back and get told that you can't have that phrase in there because it's offensive.
Okay, well, we can probably edit that part out so I won't look so stupid. But in terms of the whole sensitivity reader thing, I don't care if you use them. I don't use them. I'm not going to use them. And if you want to use them, that's fine. To me, in order to make great art, or at least try to make great art, you have to take the risk to offend. I don't strive to offend, but I take that risk. And I think if you don't take that risk, you're not going to, you don't have a chance of making great art, and you're taking, some of your best weapons out of your hand. You have to take that risk. If you don't, I hear authors once in a while, or artists making, bragging that their work won't offend anybody. And that's not an accomplishment.
No.
Wish I could.
Yeah, I
figure
don't.
out.
I don't think. I don't think anyone should do it. But it's like, I don't care if anybody wants to either. It's just, if I'm sitting down and I'm reading something that has a sensitivity reader, it's just an element of any writing that's good is it's true, it's real, it's honest.
That's right.
And having a sensitivity reader go through that is to take that out. So as a reader, I just will be like, this sucks. I don't want to read this. This is not good.
Yeah, I don't want to read something that's sanitized. And that, to me, if you're using a sensitivity reader, you're seeking to sanitize your work. And that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in somebody portraying something that on some level is actually happening, and I'm not interested in getting a watered down version of it. I'm looking for the real thing. And as soon as you start sanitizing your character's language, your character's actions, etc., you've literally lost the plot.
Yeah, look, I mean, literature, I mean, any form of art, but we're talking about writing, obviously. I mean, literature is all about the expression of the human experience by the author as how they see it, how they've experienced it, how they might imagine it, who knows. That varies. But if you're going to start making everything go through this process of sanitization, then, and not to try and get us into a different topic, but you may as well let AI write all the books. Because that way you can guarantee you're not anything offensive.
We'll discuss AI definitely in another.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to take us down that path. That's all right.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, because obviously that's a huge topic. I did a little research on the effects of being offended on the brain, what those effects are, and it turns out, as I suspected, I did it because I suspected that people who get offended receive a dopamine rush, an unearned dopamine fix, as well as serotonin. So it's a very powerful mix of chemicals, I think. And this is leading to a question. I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but it's very clear to me that we now live in a society where we have a large segment of the population, a disturbingly large segment of the population, who is getting high off of being offended. Once you get, it's just like with porn addiction or any other addiction. Once you release the dopamine without earning it by, exercising or doing something, finishing a book. When you finish a book, right? When you type the end at the end of a book on your rough draft, you get a dopamine rush because you've accomplished something. With getting offended, what happens is there are some people who genuinely get offended, and that the brain's response is to go into fight or flight, and that's what releases the dopamine and the serotonin. But as I said, a large portion of the population has now trained itself, or been trained, I don't know, to seek that dopamine fix every day, which means there can be no end game to this. There's never going. So today we scrub Roald Dahl for the words fat and ugly. And then what words did they use to replace? Plump and unpleasant? Like what word? Well, those words will then become offensive tomorrow. So then we're going to have to do another round. What is the end game of this? There is none, because it's an addiction.
The I'm offended virus will always need a new host. And I don't know, like, if you guys, I've never read those Dune books. I've seen all the movies, but sometimes I'm not a huge sci-fi guy, but sometimes with decent sci-fi, it's like, oh, they predicted something that will probably need to happen. Maybe they predicted something that did happen, but maybe an author predicted something that will need to happen. And in those books, the timeline, like 1,000 years or something like that before the first book is set, there was a war between the humans and the AI machines and the personal computers, and the humans just narrowly won, and they're living in the aftermath of a world like that. And it's like, the more, people are tied to their phones, people's personalities are tied to what they get from their phones, and younger people, they don't know anything other than the dopamine rush that your phone gives you. And there's no, they're not going to just put their phone away. Like, that's not something that's going to happen anytime soon. And so part of me kind of thinks that, like, we won't see it, but someday this, like, man versus machine war that Frank Herbert predicted in his books, it seems like it will have to happen at someday or another. But other than that, it's just like, people just have to, like, divest from that rush, especially that rush that they get from their phone all the time. It's just such a huge part of it, and it's destructive. It's really destructive. It's not a good thing for the world.
Well, no, I think the dopamine rush is also obviously tied to social media.
Yeah.
And so when people are offended, it presents an opportunity to be a moral exhibitionist of little substance, and to accrue social credit points, and that's the currency. That's what it is, and that's what it's about. And I can pretty much read who's doing it for those purposes and who's not. And I would say more people who are engaging in that than not are doing it for the exact reasons I've just mentioned.
Well, the other big thing with social media, and to tie it back to Alec talking about him being cancelled, as we all remember in recent history, is that social media gives all of those people the opportunity to say whatever they want with zero consequences.
Yep.
Most of the things you see those people say, if they said it to somebody's face in the street, they'd end up in A&E.
Well, and they don't realize that it's a circular thing. Today's sacred cow is tomorrow's hunted species, and it all comes around. It all comes around, and if you're engaging in that, and you are presenting yourself as morally pure, chances are pretty good you're going to be the person that's found at the glory hole or something like that. That's the reality of this. And I've seen example after example of that, in which, we go through phases. And for a while, people from this group are the sacred cow, and then their time is up and they get eaten for basically doing the same thing that they've been praised for. And it all comes around. It all will come around. And if you present yourself as morally pure, your time's going to come. Sure as I'm sitting here.
Well, and Andrew said something earlier about William Friedkin's desire to present himself as an anti-racist, and I always have this to say about that. Is there anybody here who's pro-murder? Raise your hand if you're pro-murder.
It might depend on who we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I understand that, but Do you ever, most of us are not pro-murder. Most
As a
of us could
principle, no,
probably
I'm not.
describe ourselves as anti-murder. Do you have to go around and tell people that you're anti-murder? Do you have to make pronouncements that, or is that just something that's taken for granted because you're not murdering anybody or sending money to a charity that supports murderers or anything?
Well, I don't know, but there sure are. We've seen examples in fairly recent history where we've seen a whole lot of people celebrating murder, and I mean, I don't feel the need to go on social media and say, I am against murder. I imagine, it would be a given. But certainly have been large crowds of people to celebrate murder, to celebrate death, and we do see that regularly.
Well, you talked about the glory hole and how it's we see this with preachers, right? Where preachers are anti-homosexual and then they're caught in the Minnesota bathroom tapping their toes. And I bring that up because the whole anti-racist thing, or even anti-fascist. We know that psychoanalysis says the louder you protest, the more you are projecting. Correct?
Now, death protests too much.
Just thinking that one. Yep.
Yeah.
So right. So when I hear anti-racist and when I hear that somebody is desperate to prove that they're anti-racist, the only thought that goes through my head is, wow, that person must really be racist. If they have to make such an effort to and William Friedkin was a pretty smart guy. That has always shocked me that he did that. To take a film that was already out for 40 plus years, and decide after 40 years, I need to remove this clip here and destroy the film, because as Andrew described, it causes a jump cut that destroys the film. Simply on your deathbed to let people know, hey, I didn't support racism. I question. Was that really? Is that true? I mean, he made a great. I think that the moment that he's censoring in the movie makes an anti-racist statement, and here he is taking it out. You see what I'm getting at?
I think it can be really like kind of like a case by case basis, because I definitely think the same thing about certain people that use terms like that. When someone says like, I'm an anti-racist, I tend to think this is a person that doesn't look at, if they were to see a bunch of African Americans in a crowd, they wouldn't see a bunch of individual human beings where I might like one, not like the other. They would see them all as victims. They're all inferior and they need my help. And we're not really trained to look at that as a form of racism, but it is. It generalizes people. It preaches a racial hierarchy, which I'm against in all forms. But with someone like Friedkin, I mean, I don't know. I just think he was only around really privileged Hollywood people for so long. And I don't think he got anyone to just say like, you didn't have to do that, man. I think that the spell can be broken with certain people. With some people, they're committed to it. And if you try to persuade them out of it, they'll just double down. But with other people, like I've had people in my life where I felt them kind of going along with the herd, and I sort of said something like, hey, like, just in my opinion, COVID ended like many, many years ago. So if you don't want to wear that mask right now, you don't have to. It's up to you. Like, I'm not telling you, but like, that's kind of it would be okay with me if you wanted to. Like, I wouldn't judge you. And it was like, I had that happen with someone and they just stopped wearing it. Like, that was it. It with certain people, they can be reached. And with other people, it's just like the social pressure is just so strong and it's just everywhere.
Yeah. And combined with the fact that, and I'm going to sound very cynical about the human race here, but I think the majority of people lack any significant capacity to think for themselves.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I went through. I mean, before I moved to the States, I worked for 6 years on a university campus, and I got here and sort of had my wilderness summer where I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. Played a lot of golf, and at that point, at some point, being out on the course, it occurred to me that I really didn't know what I thought anymore. I knew what my friends thought. I knew what my colleagues thought. I knew what, my quote unquote party thought. And, I didn't know what I thought. And it took me about 6 months to get back to ground zero in terms of what I thought and, sort of to remove myself from that echo chamber that I was in and have the freedom to start thinking for myself again. I think if you're working on a university campus in this day and age, there is a fair bit of indoctrination. There is a lot of can and can't do, and we're teaching young people what to think as opposed to how to think for themselves.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to remove yourself from that culture. It's something that I see around here where I am, and people from the two parties don't mix socially, which is not something I ever bought into. And and if you're doing that, if you're just staying in that place, it's going to be very difficult to have any diversity of thought. And it's one of the things that Irshad Manji talks about, in terms of diversity, that if you don't have diversity of thought, then it's fake diversity. And and that's sort of what we are, or where we are as a culture.
I mean, two comments I'd like to add to that is one is that in terms of thinking for yourself, one of the keys to that is having the time to sit and reflect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we think for ourselves at the end of the day. So social media plus devices, I think, is completely destroying that. There's no reflection time for people anymore, unless you can make a conscious effort to do it. But as you guys have already spoken about with the dopamine hit and all the rest of it, and as we've seen from a couple of recent court cases, in the States, the whole research behind those platforms and the algorithms is exactly to do what they're doing. But the other thing I'd say in terms of the ability to think for oneself is, and taking it back to our current topic, is once you start altering the language, as Orwell spelled out for us very clearly, once you start altering language, you alter the ability to think. And that, I think, is the actual evil behind a lot of this wokeism.
And you've talked about this before, AB. If once you start trying to change my words, you're changing what I'm going to say. And I'd like to give some examples, but that'll start a whole other shit show entirely. But I mean, that's where the culture is. And in terms of social media, I look at how things have changed during the course of my lifetime. And with social media, something occurs, and a whole lot of people get out there with a knee-jerk reaction without thinking it through. And when I was a kid, if I got really worked up about something and I wanted to write a letter to the editor or something, I had to type it out, I had to proof it, I had to prepare an envelope and source a stamp, and by then it was not going to be the next day until I put it in the mail, and I had the night to sort of sleep on it, think about it, and say, well, that's what you originally thought. Now you've got a little bit more context to it, and do you want to still say that? Do you want to say it in a different way, or do you want to say it at all? And with the internet does last forever, and so people are just getting out there, and their first reaction after reading something that's true or not true, or you don't have the the 5 W's on it or whatever, they're going out there half cocked, and once it's out there, and everybody wants to get out there first, and that's the sort of downfall of it, right?
Right.
Yep.
Well, we're out of time, but I do think we've resolved the issue. Changing sex is evil.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Resolved.
Yep.
Right. It's,
Am I still allowed to use the word evil?
I'm offended.
Oh.
yeah, well, okay. Well, then I guess we can't do the podcast anymore. If one person's offended. Okay. Well, I'm Alec Cizak. That's Vern Smith, Andrew Miller, A.B. Patterson. If you're watching this and you're unfamiliar with the Independent Fiction Alliance, you can find us at www.independentfictionalliance.com. Very simple. And we're also at Indie Fiction All at what is it, Twitter or X, whatever it is, Twitter, whatever Twitter is called now. Shit show Twitter. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll be back with another exciting topic.
Good talking to you guys.
Good talking,
Thanks, guys.
gentlemen.
See you all.